Uherský Brod, Czechoslovakia, 1975. Inside a state-owned arms factory in southeastern Moravia, workers are hand-finishing a new pistol chambered in 9x19mm parabellum, the cartridge of NATO. Not the 7.62 by 25mm Tokarev the Czechoslovak army carried. Not the 9mm Makarov the Warsaw Pact was standardizing around, the enemy's caliber. The pistol was never meant for the soldiers a few hundred kilometers away on the socialist side of the Iron Curtain. It was built to be sold to the other side, and then the state locked it in a vault. The design was covered by 4 patents, and those patents were filed in secret, classified so that no one could learn they existed, which also meant no one could register the same design inside Czechoslovakia. There was a cost to that secrecy, and it was total. Neither the designer nor the factory was permitted to file for patent protection abroad. The most refined service pistol of its generation entered the world legally naked. Anyone, anywhere, could copy it. Eventually, nearly everyone did. This is the story of the CZ-75, a pistol designed behind the Iron Curtain for the West, praised by the West's most famous handgun authority as proof that the wrong side of the Cold War had built the better gun, cloned on 4 continents, produced by the million, and carried by police and militaries across the world. It is also the story of a stranger fact sitting underneath all of that. For its first decade, the pistol could not be bought in the country that made it. The army of Czechoslovakia would not carry its own masterpiece for 14 years, and by the time it did, Czechoslovakia was ceasing to exist. But before the vault, before the clones, before any of it, there is the man the factory turned to in 1969. He had already retired. He was 62 years old, and the factory offered him something it had never offered anyone in his 40-year career: a blank sheet of paper. The story of how a retired engineer's 4 secret patents ended up arming both sides of the Cold War only gets stranger from here. A quick like and subscribe keeps this kind of history coming, and stay for the part where his own army finally got the gun, 14 years late. To understand why that blank sheet of paper mattered, you have to understand what kind of country Czechoslovakia was before the curtain fell across it. Between the 2 world wars, the armament industry was one of the pillars of the Czechoslovak economy, responsible for a large share of the country's exports. Czech engineering had a global reputation. The British Bren gun, one of the most respected light machine guns of the Second World War, was a modified version of the Czechoslovak Zabí Vivz 26. In 1935, a new armament factory was established at Uherský Brod in the southeast of Moravia, sited deliberately as far as possible from the western border with Nazi Germany. Its early work was aircraft machine guns. Its name was Česká zbrojovka, roughly the Czech Armory. Then came 1948 and the communist coup. Heavy industry was nationalized. The Western export markets that Czech arms makers had spent decades building were cut off behind the Iron Curtain. But Czechoslovakia did something almost no other Warsaw Pact country did. It kept designing its own weapons. While the rest of the bloc took Soviet imports and Soviet licenses, the Czechoslovak army carried the domestically designed Viz-58 rifle, a weapon that looks like an AK-47 and shares almost no parts with one. The factory at Uherský Brod produced the Viz-23 submachine gun, and by 1962, the Viz-61 Scorpion machine pistol. The engineering culture survived the politics. It just had nowhere to sell. At the center of that culture were 2 brothers. Josef and František Koucký became the most important engineers at the Uherský Brod works after the Second World War. participating to some degree in the design of essentially every weapon the company made. Before the war and during it, they had built the ZK-383 submachine gun. After it, the ZKK 600 hunting rifles and the ZK-M452 rimfire rifles, whose descendants CZ still sells today. The initials ZK stood for Zbrojovka Koucký. The brothers signed their designs jointly, using only the surname, a practice that makes it impossible, even now, to say which brother thought of which idea. They shared the credit deliberately. It was a habit that would echo in a darker key in what happened to their most famous design. By 1969, František Koucký was freshly retired. He was 62, with 4 decades of submachine guns, rifles, and machine guns behind him. That is when the company came back to him with a job: design a new pistol in 9x19mm parabellum. And, as the story is commonly told inside CZ and repeated in the accounts that trace back to it, this time came with a condition no working engineer at a state factory ever got: complete freedom, no committee, no inherited receiver, no mandated mechanism. The whole gun, from scratch. The commercial logic shaped what freedom would build. The pistol was for export only. Czechoslovak forces were wedded to Warsaw-packed cartridges, so a 9x19mm gun had no domestic customer by definition. According to accounts from within the modern company, the project began as talk of a small self-defense pistol until a foreign distributor demanded the kind of large-capacity magazine the FN High Power carried, and then a double-action, single-action trigger on top of it. High capacity, modern trigger, NATO's caliber. A wish list written by the West, handed to a pensioner in Moravia. What he drew in response is why this video exists. Pick up a CZ-75, and the first thing a trained eye notices is what is missing. On almost every semi-automatic pistol, the slide rides on rails outside the frame. The slide wraps around the frame's top. Koucký inverted it. On the CZ-75, the slide rides inside the frame rails, the way it does on the Swiss SIG P210, widely regarded then as the most accurate production service pistol in the world. That inversion does 2 things at once. It lets the barrel sit lower in the hand, a low-bore axis, which means the recoil drives back into the palm rather than levering the muzzle upward. And it gives the slide a long, consistent, tightly guided path, so the barrel returns to the same position relative to the sight's shot after shot. The cam action of the locking system mates the barrel lugs into the slide recesses with very little variance. Less muzzle flip, repeatable lockup. Those 2 properties together are most of what accuracy means in a service pistol, and they explain why this design would go on to dominate practical pistol competition for decades. The lockup itself was proven Browning. A tilting barrel with locking lugs engaging recesses in the slide, the linkless cam system descended from the high power. Koucký was not inventing for invention's sake. He was selecting, taking the best proven mechanism of the century and mounting it in a better chassis. Around it, he built the feature set the export market had demanded, and no single pistol yet combined. A staggered column magazine holding 15 rounds, later 16, more than the high power that inspired the requirement, at a time when most service pistols in the world still held 7 or 8. Then there was the trigger, and here the design deserves a moment of plain explanation, because it is the feature that made the CZ-75 something new. A double-action, single-action trigger means the pistol has 2 personalities. With the hammer down over a loaded chamber, the first pull of the trigger does 2 jobs at once. It raises the hammer and then releases it. That first pull is long and deliberate, a safety in itself, the same logic as a police revolver. Nothing happens unless you mean it. But the moment that first shot fires, the cycling slide cocks the hammer automatically, and every shot after it is single action, a short, light, crisp pull, the kind target shooters prize. One gun, both temperaments. Plenty of pistols in 1975 offered that. What almost none of them offered was Koucký's third option. Because he mounted a manual safety on the frame instead of a decocker on the slide, the CZ-75 could also be carried cocked and locked, hammer back, safety on, exactly the way American shooters carried the Colt 1911, so that the very first shot could be that crisp single-action pull. Double-action security or single-action speed, the shooter's choice, in a 15-shot 9mm. In 1975, nothing else on Earth combined all of it in one gun. The 1-9 era that would define the 1980s was, in effect, announced from Moravia years early, from the wrong side of the Iron Curtain. The first pistols, built from 1975 to 1979, were forged steel, hand-fitted and hand-finished, a level of labor that was economically possible only because labor in socialist Czechoslovakia cost almost nothing. All of it designed without computer modeling, without simulation, by a retired engineer working from experience and instinct. The concept was, by general assessment today, a full generation ahead of its time, and František Koucký knew what it was worth. He was, by the accounts of those who have studied him, deeply concerned with patent protection throughout his career, and this design was no exception. It was covered by 4 patents. Because the armed forces might conceivably take interest, the 4 were filed as secret patents, invisible even inside the country. In 1979, the decision came down to declassify all 4. And here the record goes quiet, in the way that socialist bureaucracies go quiet. Something went wrong. The window for securing world patent protection was missed, and it never reopened. The finest pistol design of its generation belonged, legally, to everyone. What happened when the West finally got its hands on it is the part the numbers tell best. The verdict came from the least likely juror. Colonel Jeff Cooper, the American father of modern pistol technique, the high priest of the .45 caliber 1911, a man on record disdaining both the 9mm cartridge and double-action triggers, examined the CZ-75 and declared it the finest 9mm service pistol yet manufactured. He went further, remarking that it was an embarrassment to the West that a gun this good came from behind the Iron Curtain. He could forgive the caliber and the trigger because the pistol did the one thing he considered non-negotiable. It could be carried cocked and locked like a fighting pistol should be. When Cooper set out in the early 1980s to create his ideal combat handgun, the Dornaus and Dixon Bren 10, the first 10mm pistol, he based its design on the CZ-75. The West's most famous handgun authority did not just praise the communist pistol, he copied it. He was in good company because by then the 4 declassified, unprotected patents had become an open invitation, and the world was answering. Italy's Tanfoglio built the TZ-75, and an entire catalog of descendants sold in America for decades as the IAEA witness line. Israel Military Industries partnered with Tanfoglio to build the Jericho 941, imported to the United States as the Baby Eagle, and issued it to Israeli police and security forces. Switzerland produced 2 separate lines, the ITM AT-84 and the luxury-grade Sphinx pistols, CZ architecture executed to watchmaker tolerances. Turkey's Sarsılmaz built clones. China's Norinco built the NZ-75. Springfield Armory in the United States sold the P9. Armalite, the company born from Eugene Stoner's rifle, imported a Turkish-built CZ clone called the AR-24. Even North Korea built one, the Baek Doosan, the sidearm of the Korean People's Army elite. Count them up, and the CZ-75 stands as the second most copied pistol design in history, surpassed only by the M1911 itself, and the 1911 needed its patents to expire honestly, with time. The CZ-75 was given away by accident at birth. The original kept selling anyway, and it kept evolving because Uherski Brod answered the clone flood the only way it could, by building the platform outward into a family. Over 1 million CZ-75 pistols have been produced, and the manufacturer claims, a claim worth stating as the manufacturer's own, that the CZ-75 and its variants serve with more governments, militaries, police forces, and security agencies than any other pistol in the world. When the popularity of IPSC, practical shooting, surged in the newly free Czech Republic, the factory formed its own competition team in 1992, and that same year an engineer named Stanislav Křížek built the first dedicated race version, the CZ-75 Champion. The line that followed reads like a map of everywhere the design could go. The steel-framed SP-01 for duty and sport, the compact alloy-framed P-01 and PCR for police carry, the subcompact RAMI, named for its own two engineers, Radek Hauerland and Milan Trkulja, the polymer-framed P-07 duty of 2009, with a simplified trigger mechanism, and an exterior openly influenced by the Swiss Sphinx 3000, which was itself an enhanced CZ-75 clone. Sit with that for a second. The copy had become good enough to shape the original. By 2012, Czech Army paratroopers of the 4th Rapid Deployment Brigade were fully equipped with a polymer CZ-75 variant, and in 2016, the factory's elite competition shooters helped design the Shadow II, the pistol that now defines the top of iron sight competition worldwide. The design's dominance there needs no asterisk at all. At the 2020 USPSA Production Division Nationals, 45% of shooters were running a CZ, with more running CZ pattern clones, and the factory team took 9 medals at the 2022 IPSC Handgun World Shoot. 50 years after a pensioner drew it, his low-bore axis and internal rails still define what a winning pistol looks like. And the NATO paradox closed its own loop. In 2002, the Czech National Police adopted the P01, and the pistol went through NATO's evaluation process. Thousands of dry firings and decockings, drop tests onto concrete from every angle with 0 failures permitted, freezing, baking, mud, sand, and a service life requirement built around 15,000 rounds. It passed, and it carries a NATO stock number, 1005 to 16008619, engraved on its frame. The pistol, conceived in NATO's caliber, behind NATO's enemy lines, is today a NATO-certified sidearm. Nearly every country in that alliance could buy it, issue it, or copy it freely for decades. Every country except one, the one that made it. Here is the fact that even people who own a CZ-75 usually do not know. The pistol was not sold in Czechoslovakia until 1985, a full decade after its introduction. It was an export product of a planned economy, and the plan did not include Czechs. For 10 years, the workers hand-fitting those forged frames in Uherský Brod were building a pistol their own countrymen could not legally purchase, in a caliber their own army was forbidden by alliance politics to adopt. And the army itself had to wait longer still. The Czechoslovak armed forces adopted the CZ-75 only after the Velvet Revolution in 1989, after the fall of the government whose secrecy had defined the gun's entire life. The pistol came home 14 years late, to a country that within 4 more years would split in two. The export machine nearly broke the gun in a second way, and this episode is more obscure still. By the late 1970s, demand from abroad was outrunning what hand-fitted forging could supply, so the state export agency Mercuria opened negotiations in 1977 with the Spanish firm Alfa in Eibar to cast frames abroad at lower cost. An agreement was signed in 1979. In March of that year, testing revealed cracks in the Spanish cast frames. The response reshaped the pistol permanently. The frame and slide were strengthened for a second-generation design. The slide rails lengthened from 115 millimeters to 140, which is why the short rail originals of 1975 to 1980 are now the collector's grail, and why the CZ-75 the world actually knows, the long-railed silhouette on 1 million holsters, exists in its final form because a cost-cutting outsourcing deal cracked under proof loads. František Koucký died in 1994. He lived to see the Velvet Revolution, and he lived to see the army of his own country finally holster the pistol he had drawn in retirement a quarter-century before. What he never saw was a royalty statement equal to the design. The 4 patents that were supposed to protect his most careful work had been declassified into a global commons before the gun was 5 years old. The CZ-75's conquest of the world was never a triumph of the system that built it. It was that system's failure exported. So return to the vault, because the vault is the whole story. In 1975, a state classified 4 patents to keep a pistol secret, and in doing so guaranteed that the pistol could never be protected. Every consequence in this video flows downhill from that single act. The clones in Italy and Israel and Switzerland and Turkey and China and North Korea, the Bren 10, the Witness, the Jericho, the Sphinx that grew refined enough to lend its face back to the factory that inspired it, the 45% of a national championship's shooters gripping the same grip angle, the American colonel building his dream gun on communist bones. The M1911 became public property the honest way. Its patents ran their term and expired into history. The CZ-75 became public property by bureaucratic accident, born free against its designer's explicit wishes, a man who cared about patent protection more than almost anything and was overruled by the machinery of secrecy itself. The vault was supposed to be armor. It was a giveaway, notarized in advance. There is a version of this story where that is a tragedy, and the Koucký brothers give it a strange kind of permission to be something else. They spent their whole careers signing their work with a bare surname, 2 men folding their individual genius into a shared name so that no one could ever divide the credit. The world did to their pistol what they had always done to themselves, erased the boundary of ownership and let the design stand on its own. It is not the ending František would have chosen. It is the ending that made the CZ-75 immortal. Picture him instead at the beginning. 1969, a 62-year-old retired engineer at a kitchen table in Moravia called back for one more job. On the paper in front of him, a pistol taking shape in a caliber his own army is forbidden to carry. For customers on the far side of a border, he will never cross, with a slide that rides inside the frame, because 40 years of machines have taught him where accuracy actually lives. He draws it as well as he can, and he files 4 patents to keep it his. The state stamps them secret, and the secret does the one thing secrets do best. It gets out.